Hello, good morning. Online since I'm audible. Okay. So we'll be starting with the crash course today only. But before I come with the lectures and say the topic that we are supposed to discuss today, I'll just have some brief idea about what you need to focus upon exam में किस चीज की demand है and what you should be doing in this time period, say till mains. Okay. So approximately everyone they have around 1,000 hours. Okay. आपके पास अभी मेंस तक आपके पास 1,000 घंटे हैं पढ़ने के लिए. And just remember that every hour is all very 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 important. Okay, so you don't have the time to waste this 1 hour also right now, specifically the ones who are appearing for mains or say they are probable to appear for mains. And out of this 1,000 hours, I expect around 400 hours you will be giving to anthropology. Okay, so and 600 hours has to be given to your GS, because that balance has to be maintained. So one thing first, just remember that every one of you must have chosen anthropology thinking that okay, I'll get 300. Okay, and that's a fair expectation. But the thing is, don't entirely rely on the optional. Okay, or don't rely on only one subject. So you must have heard that quotation that don't put your eggs in the single basket. You never know what kind of marking scheme might happen. Say for example 2024, if you are aware, so optionals entirely they had very average scores. Okay, so none of the optional they were having some extraordinary scores. Most of the optionals, say specifically the humanities, none of, say average score went down to 250 to 260 इस range में चला गया था. Now anybody who has extraordinarily put some efforts on only the optional, thinking that that particular subject will actually help me sail through mains, in that case the person is definitely having a chance to get doomed. That attempt is definitely doomed there. Okay, so don't overly rely on one subject. A fair understanding, a fair conceptual clarity of that subject, and some decent amount of answer writing, that is more than enough. Okay, इससे ज़्यादा आपसे expected नहीं है. Okay. Second thing that you should remember, focus only on writing. So these days, say basically the 80-85 days that's there before mains, rather than reading, you should be focusing more on writing. Okay. Reason being, see, I believe all of you must have prepared for like 1 year or 2 years approximately, and in this 1 or 2 years you definitely would have read the same kind of notes or say same kind of text like 2-3 times. The brain is very much programmed like that you always will have a desire to read one more time. So even if you are reading like 100th time, you will still have the desire to read it 101st time. Even now also when I'm taking the lectures, okay, still before the class I have a desire कि एक बार और पढ़ लूँ क्या पढ़ाना है, maybe I might not miss the point. Okay, uh, but that desire of getting perfect or say being perfect with respect to certain topics and all, and that will uh, make you away, or say that might drift you away towards what is actually required. What is actually required is not reading. What is actually required is writing. Okay, so write as much as possible. The more you write, the more flow or the muscle memory will develop, the more flow from the brain to the hands will happen, and you will feel at ease in the mains. Okay, अगर आपने लिखा नहीं है, even if I give you the leaked paper just one day before, you will not be able to finish the paper in the exam. So what is more required is writing. And if you are not writing around 3-4 answers a day, okay, trust me, no matter what you do, it's not going to work. So make sure that on an average 3 to 4 answers a day has to be written. Means I always quote this idea that the test paper or so the mains paper is like a marathon, but for running a marathon you need to do the jogging every day. Okay, without jogging you are not going to qualify the marathon. कुछ नहीं होगा अगर आपने 3-4 answers रोज नहीं लिखे. And which questions? Don't look for some random platforms giving some typical questions. The best questions that has to be written is the PYQs. Okay, so last 5 years is the target. 280 questions are there, 4 answers a day, 70 days, you are done with the PYQs. Okay, so that has to be done on with a religious basis. अगर आपने 280 सवाल किए इस दिन इन दिनों में, trust me, nobody can stop you from qualifying mains. And if you are not writing those PYQs, no matter whatever you do, all is wasted. सब कुछ खराब है. Okay, So understand this. This test series, this crash course, any kind of program will not be of any help if you're not writing the PYQs, because it's giving you some kind of tricks, it's giving you some kind of knowledge. आप एक वैसे वॉरियर हो जिसके पास वेपन्स तो बहुत सारे हैं, बट यू डोंट नो हाउ टू यूज इट. एंड इफ यू डोंट नो हाउ टू यूज इट, व्हाट्स द पॉइंट ऑफ सच काइंड ऑफ नॉलेज? अगर आपके दिमाग में तो बहुत कुछ है लेकिन आपको पता ही नहीं कैसे लिखना है उसको, और कब यूज करना है, कहाँ लिखना है. सो जस्ट रिमेंबर दैट इफ यू आर नॉट राइटिंग, पेन पेन नहीं चल रहा है तो कुछ नहीं होगा. सो फोकस मोर ऑन राइटिंग. ओके. एंड another thing, see, I always discuss what decides your score. So there are always the four variables other which are in our control. Other than that, one is the luck. That's definitely beyond our control. उसके लिए पूजा करिए. But the four variables that are in our control. The first one being the content of the answer. So if you have a decent content, an average content, that definitely will get you the score. Now, what is required in the content? Do we need a lot of scholars? Do we need a lot of case studies? The answer is big no. Okay, a mix of arguments and the say case studies or say some kind of evidences. Without the argument, evidence is of no use. Without the evidence, argument is of no use. Okay, so there has to be a balance in the argument and the evidence. आप बहुत सारी case studies इकट्ठे करते जा रहे हो, just looking at the new case studies and you feel like tempted कि ये भी लिख लूं, ये भी लिख लूं. But what's the point of it? If you have just two relevant case studies for a particular topic, what's the point of having 10 different other case studies? Okay, that won't fetch you some extra marks. Okay, so some decent amount of case studies and plus some classical scholars. You don't need to have like a bunch of scholars. कोई इधर उधर का कोई नया scholar है, उसने कुछ study की है, and you quoting it won't be impressing the examiner. Maybe if somebody is old enough, say maybe somebody who is in late 50s or 60s, he's evaluating your copy, professor level ka banda, so he might get irritated because you are name dropping. I have seen a lot of copies जहाँ पे name dropping होती है कि फलाने ने ऐसा कहा, फलाने ने वैसे कहा. You are writing 10 names and none, all of them are saying the same thing without elaborating upon anyone. Okay, in that case, the examiner might get irritated that he is showing off. Okay, and it might actually backfire. So, and one particular question might actually have a bad impact on rest of the copies also. So please don't overdrop the scholars. Rather, try to explain the clarity of thought. Simple words. Say I was listening to one of the socio topper, uh, rank 2 this year. So she said one very beautiful thing, and you should always remember that act like you are a sixth attempter. You should have a knowledge of a sixth attempter, but write like a first attempter. Okay, जो पहली अटेम्प्ट में लिखते हैं, वेरी नेचुरल, वेरी ल्यूसिड, वेरी सिंपल, इजी टू अंडरस्टैंड. ओके, सिंपल शादी भाषा में लिखना है. सिंप्लिसिटी इज द बेस्ट सोफिस्टिकेशन. रिमेंबर दैट if you're able to explain what has been asked in the exam in a very simple word lucid manner, definitely it will be appreciated like anything. Okay, और यही तो ब्यूटी है. if you're able to explain a complex topic in a very easy to understand manner that anybody who reads it understands it, definitely it will impress the examiner. Okay, and that is what they are looking for. So rather than writing complex statements, long big statements, very heavy words, vocabulary and all such kind of things, definitely will not impress the examiner. But आपको अगर दिखाना है कि that yes I am a UPSC aspirant, definitely I have a good knowledge, आप उसको ऐसे ही दिखा सकते हो कि आपने बहुत ही कॉम्प्लेक्स आइडिया को बहुत सिंपल भाषा में समझा दिया उसको, and he will definitely appreciate. Okay, so just remember this, and that will not come just by reading or say रट्टा मारने से. It will come by writing. आपने कुछ समझा है, आप उसको अपने words में लिखने की कोशिश करो. Okay, and as soon as you start, problem comes basically uh, when we try to quote verbatimly, and that is, so we understand a lot of topics, but problem in the answer writing comes because मेरे को confidence इसलिए नहीं आ रहा क्योंकि मैं verbatimly quote कर रहा हूँ, exact statement को उठा के लिखने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ, and these are relatively complex statements and they cannot be reproduced. Even the scholar who said that will not be able to reproduce without looking at his notes when he is supposed to take a lecture. Okay, तो वो भी simple भाषा में बताएगा, आप क्यों उसको copy करने की कोशिश कर रहे हो? So just make sure that write in the most simplest, lucid, easy to understand language, and that should be your focus on the content. Quantity पे नहीं, quality पे काम करेंगे. The second one is like the presentation. Okay. The presentation, remember that the first and the basic rule of every answer is that it should have a structure. Okay, intro, body, conclusion, it's mandatory. Even if you have 2 points, even if you have 3 points, even if you are not able to fill the pages that is allotted for that particular question, you should be following intro, body, conclusion format, because there is a number for the structure itself. Okay, plus in the body, just remember that you are not supposed to write paragraphs only or points only. So this is one of the basic doubt that everybody is having कि कैसे लिखना चाहिए, paragraph लिखना चाहिए या points. It should be a mix of paragraphs and points. And if you're writing paragraphs, it should not be like more than 3 statements. Okay, 3 sentences से ऊपर का paragraph नहीं होना चाहिए. It should not be like big paragraphs that might be 1 page or say 3/4 of a page. 3 statements, छोटे छोटे paragraphs, and all the paragraphs should have a heading. Why heading? Basically, don't expect the examiner to read the entire paragraph. सरकारी नौकर है, उसको भी बहुत सारे काम हैं. Copy check करना is the least important thing that he is doing. Okay, and he is not bothered because there is no option like कि CBSE का नहीं है कि आप अपनी copy rechecking के लिए डाल सकते हो. So the final result will come and you will definitely be questioning what happened wrong. Okay, and when you're writing some kind of complex thing and expecting that he will read to one, say from the beginning to the end, that is the biggest mistake or perception that we have, that examiner will read everything. No, he is not going to read everything, and you have to make his task easy by making sure that whatever paragraphs you are writing, just put a heading to it. Okay, so that that heading encapsulates the summary of what is being mentioned in that paragraph, and that is enough. वो शायद ऊपर ऊपर से glance करके ही he might actually decide, okay, you have addressed respective parts of the question and that's it. Second, whenever you are making the presentation, understand that your answer should directly hit the demand of the question. Beating around the bush, writing what you know rather than what is being asked, that is the biggest problem. Now we have some ready-made templates that we use, but that template has to be modified in the exam hall as per the demand of the question. Don't directly put in what you know. Just modify it. At least ensure that if the question has parts and subparts, try to use that parts and subparts as headings and subheadings so that you can tell the examiner that, okay, I have addressed all the parts and subparts. Okay, you should show to the examiner that ये सारे चीजें पूछी गई थी सवाल में और ये देखो ये heading करके. Even if it is a repetition of the content, still you should try to show to the examiner that these are the respective parts that has been asked, these are the respective areas, I have divided the answer into these aspects and see I have written it. Okay, so that in itself is enough that okay, you have addressed all the aspects of the question. Okay, बहुत सारे cases में I have seen the answers over a period of time that people write the correct content, but they are not addressing that which aspect of the question it is being targeting or which is directed towards. तो उस केस में it's like कि a message to the examiner कि देख भाई मैंने लिख तो दिया है, जो तुझे समझ में आए ले ले. Okay, उसमें content तो है, and that might irritate the examiner. आप उसे काम tough कर रहे हो because he has to read the entire sequence or say entire content that you have written, and maybe he will find that what is relevant with respect to the question that has been addressed but at the last. So you have to ensure that uska effort minimize ho jaye, and you should try to show that what is asked in the question that is mentioned exactly in the beginning, the question, the intro begins with it or relates to it. Second thing, there should be a flow. Okay, it should not be random. So for example, yesterday only I was seeing somebody's copy. So there was a question. It's not to disrespect that student or in any means, but I'm telling you with just an example. So there was a question that what is the impact of feminist movement on family? Because this is a very common question that has been asked. Now, the person writes that the feminist movement is so and so, and then puts a heading that impact on family. Now, seeing the question, it seems to be appropriate कि feminist movement ये है, impact on family directly आपने बता दिया, मुद्दे की बात कर दी. But there is a missing link between the intro and the body. You should, why it is being asked feminist movement and family? What's the linkage between that feminist movement and family? So feminist movement has some kind of ideology that is, yes, the gender roles are socially constructed. That means gender roles are not biological. It is basically women are being trained to do some kind of inferior roles. And who does that training? Family. And that's why the primary target of this feminist movement is the reformation of family. And that is how the feminist movements are impacting the family. And uske baad aapne bataya ki impact on family. So that linkage is broken. And in that case, the answer might not be appreciated. तो आपने सिर्फ फेमिनिस्ट मूवमेंट बताया और फिर डायरेक्टली बोल दिया इम्पैक्ट ऑन फैमिली, द लिंक इज ब्रोकन. So that flow should be there. One point should not come random. It should be basically connected with the previous idea. There should be a coherence in the ideas. Okay. Or say some of the question comes in, आप पॉजिटिव नेगेटिव बताने लग जाते हो उसके, इसका ये पॉजिटिव है. या इन सम क्वेश्चंस इट माइट बी पॉजिटिव नेगेटिव, but in many cases positive negative idea is more relevant in GS. In case of anthropology, any kind of social change is not positive negative. We don't judge whether this kind of change is positive or negative. We just talk about changes. So for example, there is a question on impact on, say, understand globalization impacts on family. Now I'll say that ki positive impacts kya hai, negative family impacts kya hai. Now somebody is writing that positive negative impacts is like breakdown of the joint family. That means I am saying that joint family is better than the nuclear family. And that's why breakdown of the joint family to nuclear family is a bad thing. But this is an ethnocentric statement, that you're saying that since your society has joint family, prevalence of joint family, and it is breaking down, it's a bad thing. It's just a social change as point from the point of view of anthropology. It's not good or bad. It simply is a change. So your answer should be looking anthropological. Okay, the content might be same, but the terminology is the way you are writing that should seem as if somebody who has a knowledge of anthropology has it. Okay, so that should be the focus of your presentation. The third one, time management. The time management will come only with practice. If you are supposed to write say answers in 19 answers in 3 hours, so you usually get around 7 minutes for 10 marker question, 10.5 minutes for say 15 marker question, and around 14 minutes for a 20 marker question. So that is the rough time division that you will be getting. And in total in mains, you will be getting around 175 minutes to finish the paper. And say out of the 180 minutes, so 5 minutes is like कि आपको MR वगैरह जो भरना होता है, attendance sheets and all, and 2-3 minutes that you will be devoting specifically to read the question paper and to select or say to make the right choices. Because if you make a wrong choice there, automatically you are out of the race. Okay, so you should be giving at least 2-3 minutes just to choose the appropriate question कि कौन सा लिखना है. Okay. Now, time management mein, there is one thing that I usually advise the students to do, to follow while attempting the paper, that never ever begin or end with a 10 marker question. Okay, so you have like first and fifth question that are compulsory 10 marker question. You should never begin with a 10 marker. Why? Because initially when you are starting to write the answer, or say when you are starting to attempt the paper, in that case you are not working at the fullest potential. Okay, there is some kind of inertia, there is some kind of a lag. आप अभी flow आना बाकी है. And in that case, to attempt the 5 questions, that too of 10 marker, it will take your brain to reset 5 times. Okay, 5 अलग अलग टॉपिक्स पे सोचना है, 5 अलग अलग इंट्रोज बनाने हैं, 5 अलग अलग कंक्लूजन बनाने हैं. And in such cases, what actually happens, that it might take a lot more time to attempt only 50 marks. आपको 5 बार इंट्रो कंक्लूजन लिखना है, 5 बार रीसेट करना है अपने ब्रेन को. इट विल टेक लाइक से इट माइट हैपन दैट आपने 50 नंबर अटेम्प्ट तो किया, बट इट टुक यू 70 minutes. And then it's like half of the time is gone, or say 70 minutes is gone, and you have attempted just 50 marks. And you are supposed to attempt 200 more marks in 1 hour 50 minutes only. And if you go for 10 markers at a stretch, so it might happen that 2 hours and you have attempted only 100 marks of the paper, and in 1 hour you have to attempt 150 marks. So us case mein you are out of the race completely. So never ever start with a 10 marker question. So how you should be starting? You should be starting with, say, suppose if you are attempting 3 questions, say let's say if you chose 2, 3 and 7. Okay, so there are 9 questions in total out of this. Out of this 9, pick up the 6 best that you know, or any 6 that you know the best, जिसके बारे में आपको एकदम पहले से आंसर पता है, the best content that you can write, just pick those 6 questions and uh, just try to attempt it in the first 70 to 75 minutes. Now it's a decent amount of time, say 70-75 minutes for 6 questions, that you're getting on an average 12 to 13 minutes per question. Okay, you can easily attempt it if you have, say, decent writing practice. So the first 6 questions in 70 to 75 minutes. Now in the next 70 minutes, you should go for 10 markers. Okay, all the 10 questions of the 10 markers should be attempted in the next 70 minutes. Reason, after attempting these 6 questions, your brain is working at the fullest potential. सब कुछ जो पढ़ा था वो एक जगह पे आ गया है, हाथ में एक स्पीड आ चुकी है, एक फ्लो बन चुका है. Now it is easy, you will be easily able to attempt the 10 marker questions at a stretch. Okay, so that you should be doing. Then in the last, what you're left with is just 15 minutes at max, or maybe 20 minutes. In that case, you should be attempting those 3 questions that you didn't know good. Okay, even if you have 5 minutes each for the questions, automatically आपको आता ही उतना था उसके बारे में. You were not knowing much about it and it won't cost you much. Okay, so that should be the focus. Plus, when you start reading the question paper, make sure whatever points come to your mind while you read the question, write it beside the question. आप उसी के बगल में लिख दो. Reason, when you attempt or when you start attempting that question, that point that you have written, the single word that you have written, will give you a point. And the time you write the first point, उसी time में आपको एक दूसरा point generate हो जाएगा. So you won't have to make pauses while writing the answer. So just write it on the question paper itself, whatever comes to your mind when you are reading a question. Simply एक दो points जो भी आ रहे हैं, and begin with those points. While writing those points, your brain will start generating some more points and eventually your pen will never stop. So that might help you save some time. Next thing, I told you that never ever end with a 10 marker question. Reason being, 10 markers are the beginning and it creates the first impression of you. So if you're attempting the 10 markers at the end, that means the quality will definitely be compromised. But your paper begins with a 10 marker question. The first impression of you as a student or as an aspirant goes with the 10 marker question. And in such cases, if your first impression is bad, definitely it will backfire in the entire paper. वो पूरे के पूरे impression paper में carry होता है. So never ever end with a 10 marker question. So 10 markers, one more thing that you need to remember with respect to 10 marker, try to breach the word limit. Okay, try to write as much as possible in the 10 marker. Because this is a hypothesis, or say maybe I believe that this is correct. And what is that? It's easy to give 7 out of 10 than to get 14 out of 20. Okay, it's like a simple analogy that I usually use, that if I have 100 rupees and I have to give 10 rupees to you, I'll definitely give it to you without any tension. But if I have 1 crore and I have to give you 10 lakh, I won't be giving it. Although I'm giving 10% in both the cases. But in the first case, the 10 rupees seems to be okay amount. The other case, although it is 10% only, but it seems to be a bigger amount. The same happens with the scores also. So if you are getting 7 out of 10, examiner doesn't feel that burden कि ये बहुत ज़्यादा number दिया जा रहा है. 7 seems to be a smaller number. But or say 8 out of 10 seems to be a smaller number. But 20 में से 16 लिखना, 16 in say just that creates an impression that it's in absolute terms it's a big number. Although it's 80% or 70%, 14 or 16, but they will not give you. But 7 or 8 out of 10 can easily be given. Now imagine you are doing the 10 markers up very well. So उस case में out of 100 you can easily make 70-75 out of 100 only in the 10 markers. And in rest of the 150 marks, say if you are able to make 50% also, say 75, that might take your score to 145, 150. But if you are not scoring well in 10 marker, no matter how well you are writing 15 or 20 markers, definitely you are not going to score. Okay, score 10 markers से ही आएगा, because they won't resist to give you even 9 out of 10. So for example, in 2016, my paper 1 score was 168 and I have left 10 marks, one 10 marker question. Okay, so out of 240, 168, that means exactly 70%. And I'm pretty sure that it will be because मेरे 10 marker जो 9 मैंने attempt किए थे, they were exact, एकदम precise answers थे. And I might have got 8 or 9 marks because ऐसा तो हो नहीं सकता दैट सब में 7 मार्क्स मिले हों, 70% है या 70, सब में थ्रू आउट द पेपर आई हैव गॉट 70%. So in some questions I would have got less than 70, in some questions I would have got more than 70% just to make the average 70%. And that more than 70 would have definitely been in the 10 marker question. I'm pretty sure about that. Okay, so make sure that the 10 markers should become your strength. Even if you don't know anything about the 10 marker, don't leave it. Okay, because they might fetch you, क्योंकि अगर वो score range is very high in the 10 marker, even वो आपको average number भी देगा तो वो आपको कुछ कुछ कंटेंट पे भी 3-4 नंबर देके छोड़ देगा. But that 3-4 marks is big number. Okay, that can change your fate. आपको सर्विस लोकेशन में, कैडर लोकेशन में, हर जगह पे वो 3-4 नंबर से बहुत ज्यादा फर्क पड़ सकता है. So just make sure that 10 markers are taken very seriously. Okay, the last one, the choice of questions. This basically you realize after the result. Okay, exam में we don't actually think that choice of questions might actually impact us, but definitely after the result, when the score comes in, you feel that the paper was okay, but I'm not getting the appropriate score. Then you realize that maybe I might not have chosen the right questions. Many of us, they have some kind of tendency, and what is that tendency? That I will write something that nobody has written. Say essay में भी आप choose करते हो, okay, this essay topic seems to be very familiar, everybody would have written, I will choose up some other topic जो थोड़ा unfamiliar हो, and that might give me an edge. वो कैसे होगा? मतलब आप कॉमन सेंसिकली सोचो, it would happen only and only if one person evaluates the entire copy. Okay, तो ऐसा है कि उसको तब पता चलेगा कि कुछ टॉपिक्स फ्रीक्वेंट हैं, कुछ टॉपिक्स नॉन फेमिलियर हैं. Are you getting this? And somebody has attempted an unconventional topic, he might definitely get some edge. But if there are 10 examiners, so in that case, how will somebody be able to spot that this topic is more conventional? वो तो कॉपी के डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन पे भी डिपेंड करता है. There are 10,000 different factors that will decide whether हो सकता है कि जो टॉपिक आपने अटेम्प्ट किया है, एक सेट ऑफ बुकलेट might have gone to an examiner जिसमें सबने वही टॉपिक लिखा हो. So in that case, it might. So write a topic जिसके बारे में सबसे अच्छे से आपको पता है, rather than choosing a question thinking that I will be able to show my analytical skills, मेरे intellect दिखा दूंगा, examiner खड़े होकर ताली बजा देगा, ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं होगा. Okay, so please don't choose that topic. Now coming to say the areas which have a greater potential to get you the score in Anthro. Say, although I'm not saying that you should be choosing those topics, but this is something. Suppose you know two questions equally well. अब उसमें कहां पे चूज करें? So in case of physical anthropology and archaeology, you should prefer physical anthropology and archaeology as compared to socio-cultural anthropology. Okay, बट वो तभी जब वो दो क्वेश्चन इक्वली अच्छे से आते हैं. अब एक केस में एक क्वेश्चन है सोशो कल्चरल एंथ्रोपोलॉजी का, एक फिजिकल का, आपको सोशो कल्चरल वाला ज्यादा अच्छे से आता है, तब ये नहीं करना है कि फिजिकल वाला सर ने बोला ज्यादा स्कोरिंग है तो वो चूज करेंगे. नो, चूज द वन दैट यू नो द बेस्ट. But in case if there is a tie that you know both the questions equally well, choose the questions of physical and archaeology. Reason, they're objective answers. Okay, straightforward answers, nothing opinionated, कुछ भी ऐसा subjective नहीं है. Direct answer है, सीधे सीधे facts हैं, you have to quote it and you have to get the score. Okay, discretion of the examiner goes or say becomes very less in such kind of answers. Second one, in case of paper 2, again archaeological part as well as the tribal India part. Caste and village, they are sensitive topics, and even if you know a good answer to a particular topic, you don't exactly know the leaning of the examiner. Okay, that particular examiner might be a Brahmin, might be a Dalit, might have some kind of left leaning, might have some kind of right leaning, or whatever it might be. And in that case, the opinions on the caste based topics might not be appreciated much. Okay, भले आपका आंसर कितना भी ऑब्जेक्टिव हो, कितना भी वेल आर्टिकुलेटेड हो, it might actually be judged based on the lens of the examiner itself. But in case of tribals, the answer is very much objective, and definitely every anthropologist or every anthropology reading student will have some kind of sympathy towards the tribes, and that definitely will fetch you some kind of marks, a decent amount of marks. Answers are very much objective, वो बहुत ज्यादा इधर उधर के opinions नहीं. Okay, so that's why focus on tribe and archaeology in paper 2 and focus on physical anthropology and archaeology in paper 1 when the choice comes in कि आपको सोशो कल्चर या फिर इसमें से चूज करना है. Okay. uh, One more thing, theories are your best friends in the subject. Okay, paper 1 may it's the theories that will actually give you a hold, and if you have a good understanding of the theories, any kind of complicated questions can be handled very well. Okay, so you don't have to worry about the questions are relatively analytical. जैसे last year आया था, anybody who understands theories properly will definitely be able to handle those analytical questions very well. उसमें ज़्यादा कुछ दिमाग लगाने वाली चीज नहीं थी. Okay, so based on this we'll start. So we'll be starting with unit 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, that is the nature, scope and development of anthropology, the history of anthropology and what kind of. So you will see that ki aajkal means in last 4 or 5 years, the questions on these topics have started to come up very frequently. One particular subjective question, 15 or 20 marker will definitely be there. We'll ask about the nature of the subject. कभी होलिज्म के बारे में पूछेगा, कभी इंटरडिसिप्लिनरी अप्रोच के बारे में पूछेगा, कभी इंटीग्रेशन ऑफ साइंस और ह्यूमैनिटीज के बारे में पूछेगा, बट डेफिनेटली द नेचर ऑफ द सब्जेक्ट इज वेरी मच इन क्वेश्चन. Okay, so in order to understand this nature of the subject, first let's understand the history of this subject. Okay, how did this subject originated, and over a period of time kaise this history basically shaped the nature of the subject. So we'll talk about first the emergence of anthropology. So there is a period of history that is pre-anthro phase. That means the phase when anthropology as a discipline did not existed. So I'm talking about the ancient and the medieval period. So in the ancient period, there used to be some philosophers like Greek philosophers, thinkers, and Roman thinkers used to be there. Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, Hippocrates. They used to make some kind of statements about the human nature, human behaviors, and all such kind of things. And they used to discuss about the humanities and all. And the foundation of anthropology was laid at that time. Okay, although not as an official discipline, but definitely there was some kind of discussions that used to be recorded, and they were talking about the nature of the mankind. Okay, now the term anthropology officially is was coined, say, or say basically is coined from the works of Aristotle, which means the anthropos means humans and logos means the study of humans. Okay, and he was the one who gave the definition of anthropology, saying that anthropology is nothing but gossip of humans about themselves. So men are very much interested about themselves, and that's why they used to gossip about themselves. And all this gossip about anything or everything related to human comes under anthropology. Okay, so this is the pre-anthro phase. Now in this phase specifically, you will see that in the medieval period, there was a rise of religious belief system. Church used to control the authority in the medieval Europe. And in that case, the central idea was of divine creation. That God created everything, and Bible is the encyclopedia of the world. Okay. So anything that is written in Bible is a fact, not an opinion. And Bible is all sciences, Bible is all history. So what is written in Bible is the history of the world. What is written in Bible is the scientific knowledge, and everything has to be run by the Bible. So that is the basic belief system that used to exist in the pre-anthro phase. Now, what came is a transition phase, or what is called as proto-anthro phase. Proto-anthro phase means the anthropology as a discipline was developing. It was a time when it was just born, but not yet officially recognized. Okay, so that's the proto-anthro phase, and it is with the beginning of Renaissance. So what changed in this phase of Renaissance? So it was the age of exploration and discovery. So people used to say The historical aspect was that the Ottoman Empire basically controlled the Middle East region. So the land route to India or Silk Route was blocked. So they wanted to come to India, but through some sea route. And that's why the travelogues, say travelers, they started to look for the sea routes to India. Okay. And in that journey, Christopher Columbus basically landed up in America, and various other, say, people, they basically landed up in some different parts of the world. Say they discovered Africa, they discovered Australia, and so on and so forth. So these travelers and explorers, they used to write their travelogues and their accounts. So these travelogues and accounts, they got more and more interest because of the invention of the printing press. So pehle the book was written, but that would be going to limited people, okay, or that might be traveling orally. But then the printing press was invented, and now multiple copies of these travelogues will be published, and that will be circulated all over the Europe. Okay, and these travelogues, they were written mostly in the form of adventure stories, in order to actually grab the attention of the readers, in order to become viral at that point of time. And this adventure stories, they had factual errors and deep-seated Christian or biblical ideologies. So they were having, say, incorrect information. Reason sometimes this incorrect information was put into it just to make it more sensational. कि ठीक है हम कहीं गए थे उसके 4 हाथ थे वो 10-10 फुट के आदमी थे आदमी खा जाते थे. So such kind of things were written just to grab the attention of the readers, factually incorrect, and also they were full of the Christian bibliological ideologies. Okay, कि these are polytheistic people, pagan people, मूर्ति पूजन करते हैं, and all such kind of things to show that kind of society in a very degraded manner. Okay, so that was the time. But these travelogues, they played a very important role in challenging the authority of the church. So Bible was considered to be the encyclopedia, but Bible had no mention of Africa. Bible had no mention of US, say America and Australia. And gradually, when these places were discovered, in that case we found that the Bible information is incomplete. Plus at the same time we were started to discover, say, some kind of scientific knowledge started to develop, so scientific ideas started to come up, and they were starting to refute the ideas that were mentioned in the Bible. Okay, and that's where the church started to lose its position because of this travelers, or say because of this explorers in the world. Okay, but at the same time the narratives that was built basically with respect to the other land, that was very much problematic. They were trying to show the other world in a very bad light. Okay, and trying to interpret the other world by using the Christian ideologies, showing them in a very bad light, ki underdeveloped hain, or say primitive people hain, such kind of things that started to come up. Now in this phase, say after Renaissance, comes the phase of enlightenment. So in case of enlightenment, it's a era of rationality or reason. So wherein the church was overthrown and religion or faith was replaced by reason. Okay. So now anything will not be taken on its face कि just because भगवान है, divine है, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है. You have to explain it by logic. It should have some kind of logic. It should have some kind of reason. Only then it will be taken up. Okay. So religion was replaced by reason here. Okay. And that is the phase of enlightenment. And the moment you challenge the idea of divine creation, कि जब भगवान जैसे आइडिया को आपने चैलेंज कर दिया कि भगवान है ही नहीं या डिवाइन क्रिएशन कभी हुआ ही नहीं, so then you will understand one particular idea that if God didn't create it, that means everything was created in some form and it has evolved. Okay, भगवान ने नहीं बनाया, इंसान ने ही सब कुछ बनाया है. So over a period of time things would have changed or it would have evolved. And the idea also comes because of one factor, that as say suppose Europeans, they landed up in Africa and they saw a group of people which are very primitive. So there is a statement that spatial difference was interpreted as a temporal difference. That means the difference because of the space or the geography was understood as a difference because of time. The European travelers thought that they have traveled past in the past. It was just a difference of geography, but it was taken like कि they have traveled in the past. उन्होंने time travel करके अपने past को देख रहे हैं. So what we were say maybe 20,000 years back or 2 lakh years back, these people are right now. Okay, so the spatial difference was understood as a temporal difference. Okay, so this is the enlightenment phase, and in this phase three major ideas they took prominence. One is the idea of human progress, that humans, they basically with knowledge are going to progress, they are going to improvise their life. So progress is the inherent nature of human journey, and with accumulation of knowledge over a period of time, human will have that progressive journey. So idea of human progress, it's inevitable. Okay, जितनी ज्यादा knowledge आती जाएगी, progress बढ़ती जाएगी. Second, perfectibility of human nature. Now what is this perfectibility of human nature? Now, here in this case, perfectibility means that for the first time in this era, we had like extraordinary surplus, and the knowledge that was being developed eventually was able to solve major problems of the humans, specifically healthcare medicine. Mein. So we were able to discover antibiotics, we were able to develop vaccines, we were able to develop say surgeries, and all such kind of things were coming up. Plus the scientific knowledge in physics, chemistry, and various other spheres started to develop, and eventually they were able to solve major problems of the humans. Say telephone ka invention hua, steam engine ka invention hua, postals came in, and so on and so forth. And that was creating a mindset or say an impression that maybe we might be moving towards a perfect life. Okay, and with this scientific discoveries and invention, the life would become perfect. So we are moving towards that perfectibility. Okay, and the third one is rationalism. That rationality is the most important factor. Without rationality, without reason, without logic, we will not be accepting any knowledge. Okay, so that is the three major pillars of this enlightenment. And now, because of this, we started to reject the idea of divine creation. And what we did after the rejection of idea of divine creation, we came up with the idea of social progress. That means अगर भगवान ने हमें ऐसे नहीं बनाया, the kind of family that we have, the kind of marriage that we have, the kind of religion or political system that we have, that means it was all created by us. And we were now seeing the idea of progress that जैसे जैसे knowledge बढ़ी, हमारी conditions improve हो रही हैं. So that means there would have been a starting point also. जब humans की society exist ही नहीं करती थी, there would have been some starting point, and over a period of time from there the human society would have evolved and developed to what it is right now with the accumulation of knowledge. So that led to the birth of idea of social progress. So scholars like Montesquieu, you must have heard about it. So he basically talks about the social progress in terms of savagery, barbarism, civilization. Auguste Comte, he is talking about the social progress in terms of like theological stage, metaphysical stage, and the scientific stage. So theological stage, that is when we used to believe in God. Everything is related to God. Okay, that's the theological stage. Then the metaphysical stage, wherein uh, you believe God is a benevolent figure, but then there are crimes happening, rapes are happening, disasters are happening, mass killings are happening. So you feel that God is not a benevolent figure, but we don't have the reason for such incidents. So we believe that there is some kind of metaphysical force, some supernatural force, which can act in either way, benevolent as well as malevolent, and that's the metaphysical phase. Okay, कि आपको रीजन नहीं पता, पर आप ये तो मान रहे हो कि कोई benevolent force तो नहीं है, भगवान जैसा कुछ नहीं है. अगर भगवान भी है तो कोई evil force भी है. Okay, that is the metaphysical phase. And then comes the scientific stage, wherein you basically reject all these supernatural forces because you are trying to derive uh, the reasons for the phenomena that are happening around you. So that is the third phase. So this is all representation of idea of social progress. एंड इसका लॉजिक क्या है कि भगवान ने कुछ नहीं बनाया. अगर भगवान ने कुछ नहीं बनाया और चीजें ह्यूमंस ने बनाई हैं और वो विथ ओवर टाइम प्रोग्रेस कर रही हैं, so there would be some starting point जहां से सब कुछ शुरू हुआ होगा, and over a period of time with accumulation of knowledge things would have developed. Okay, so this is the phase of enlightenment. Now with this enlightenment phase in the proto history period, there was rise of what is called as positivism. See, science was rising up. Science का एक what you can say in my words भोकाल था उस समय कि that everything wanted to be related to science. Okay, so the tag was very much important. And in such cases, any new discipline that is rising should have a desire to be called as scientific in nature, because if it is not scientific, in that case it will not get the respect of the society. So that's why even in the societal aspects, the subjects that originated, they were called as social sciences. उनको science का tag दिया गया because the tag of science was very much important at that point of time. Okay, and in this scientific era, basically there was a rise of what is called as positivism. Now what is this positivism? It basically refers to that any phenomena, whether social or natural, is governed by laws. It's not random. कुछ भी जो दुनिया में हो रहा है, it's not random. Any phenomena, be it the natural phenomena, be it the motions and all, उसके लिए अपनी अपनी laws हैं, like laws of motions are there, law of thermodynamics is there. In the same way, every social phenomena is also governed by laws. And the aim of any social discipline, say in case of anthropology, is to discover those laws, the general laws हमको discover करना है. And that is what is called as positivism. Discover laws that could explain these social phenomena. So that is where you will understand that there was a tendency to create theories, some general explanations of multiple social events that are happening across the world because of the rise of positivism, just to identify those general laws that could explain a set of phenomena. जैसे कि laws of motion है. So दुनिया में कोई भी motion हो रहा है, that can be explained by these three laws of motion. In the same way, there is a law of, say, culture materialism, you can say that, theory of culture materialism. So any kind of culture change happening in the world, it tries to explain any kind of culture change by saying that, okay, change in the material condition will bring a change in the structure and the superstructure. So material condition ko change karo, and that might be the reason. So this is one single law, and that can explain any kind of social changes that is happening across the world. So that is because of the rise of positivism. They wanted to discover the general laws of any social phenomena as well. Okay, and here they will try to find out some trends, say some general trends that will be seen across multiple social phenomena. जैसे कि culture materialism talks about कि general trend क्या है कि material conditions change होती हैं society की, and because change in the material conditions, eventually the other aspects of the society will adjust accordingly. Okay, so that is happening in the post enlightenment phase, and that is the proto history phase, sorry, proto anthro phase. Now the third phase is the birth of anthropology. In the birth of anthropology, you'll see two major things happen almost in a gap of 5-7 years. The first one is the Darwin's theory of evolution comes up, the theory of survival of the fittest. Okay, and that was a direct challenge to the authority of the church that humans, they have evolved from a quadruped animal, and the closest relatives of humans, they are chimpanzees. Okay, so that is the survival of the fittest. Darwin was the first person to talk about it कि भगवान ने हमें ऐसे नहीं बनाया है. In fact, we have evolved from some quadruped four-legged animals. Okay, and that is one. And parallelly in sociocultural anthropology, the classical evolutionism by Tyler. So just like humans were not created by God, in the same way culture was not created by God. Culture is also created by humans, and it has its stages of evolution. So from savagery to barbarism to civilization. Okay, so this is the birth of anthropology. So some broader theories, one talking about the human evolution in biological sense, and the other talking about the human evolution in terms of culture. Okay, and almost at the same time they came up. 1858 में डार्विन का आइडिया आता है, 1865 में टाइलर publishes the idea of say cultural evolutionism in primitive culture. Okay, 5-7 साल के difference पे. Okay, then this idea was largely ethnocentric in nature. Okay, so they basically had some kind of superiority complex, white man's burden, and so on and so forth. And that is where the next phase of anthropology, that is the beginning of modern anthropology, takes place. अब यहाँ पे अभी यहाँ तक आपको सब कुछ पता होगा, but यहाँ पे I will be talking about something that I have a big hunch that it might be asked this year or maybe next year. Okay, और जो भी मैं बोल रहा हूँ ऐसा मतलब don't take it as an astrology, मतलब मेरे को ऐसा लगता है कि ये शायद इस बार पूछा जा सकता है, मतलब प्लीज अगर नहीं आए तो don't hold me accountable, but I have that feeling. So the birth of modern anthropology is because of one particular phenomena that remains very silent, but मुझे लगता है कि शायद इस बार 10 मार्कर में पूछ सकते हैं. That is the Torres Strait expedition. You must have heard about this name, and it might come as a question, maybe the significance of Torres Strait expedition in the rise of fieldwork or in the birth of modern anthropology. Okay, now what happened 1898 में, there was a scholar in Britain. The name is AC Hedon. He had a team like C.G. Seligman, W.H.R. Rivers, and S. Ray. So he collected this team who were experts in different domains. So, for example, W.H.R. Rivers was a doctor. C.G. Seligman was an archaeologist, okay, and geologist also. And then S. Ray, basically, he was more into visual understandings and all. So they collectively decided, okay, we will be going to Polynesia, that is Torres Strait expedition, and we will do a holistic study of the people in that region. And that is what Torres Strait expedition is for. Now, this marks the beginning of field work in the anthropology. Okay, so a group of scholars going collectively, and they are studying the community in its natural habitat for the very first time. Okay, and not just the beginning of the field work. What makes it more important, that they were concerned that because of the colonization, these cultures are going to vanish. And that's why it was more like a salvage attempt. Salvage attempt means कि जल्दी जल्दी में जो भी collect कर सकते हो, जो भी record कर सकते हो, कर लो. Because maybe 10 years down the line, they might not exist also. Their culture might vanish away. And that is where they basically went there collectively. And the third most important thing is that they basically did a holistic study. That they did not just went and just observe one aspect of them. So, for example, W.H.R. Rivers basically studied their sense or sensing abilities, okay, or sensory abilities. He was a doctor, so he studied that is there any kind of difference in the sensory capabilities of the Polynesians as compared to the Europeans? Do they see or do they recognize the same colors, or do they have some kind of different biological capacities? Okay, it might sound very illogical to us now, but at that point of time, when they were discovering different parts of the world, different people, they were coming in contact with each other. So, this point of time, it's a very logical question, that are they biologically or anatomically similar to us, or do they have some kind of different physical features as well, or sensory capabilities as well? Okay, so that is when W.H.R. Rivers conducted a sensory capability test over them, just to see whether they can recognize as many colors as Europeans, whether they have the same kind of taste, or say they can identify the smells or odor or such kind of things. And he was able to conclude that they have the same sensory capabilities as the Europeans. Now, this is a big statement at that point of time that would be a blow to ethnocentrism, because the entire ethnocentric idea of white supremacy was based on the idea that ki whites have a bigger developed brain. Okay, लेकिन जब इनकी sensory capabilities equally same है as compared to the white, that means there is no difference in the intellect. Only difference that they have is because of their history. Only difference that they have is because of their different socialization, and that is what W.H.R. Rivers found there. Okay, so S-Ray, he was supposed to do the photography and say collect the visual documents for them. Okay, so such kind of thing was done by S-Ray. Seligman conducted a detailed ethnography on the communities that were visited, or say that were actually studied. So you can understand that एक तो फील्ड वर्क हुआ, that was holistic, and also that basically challenged ethnocentric ideas like the sensory capabilities test. It challenged the ethnocentric ideas. Moreover, one particular method that genealogical method, was developed by W.H.R. Rivers in this Torres Strait expedition to understand the family chart, to understand the uh, inheritance and all such kind of things. That was developed here in Torres Strait expedition. Okay, so this is a turning point in the history of anthropology, because earlier the theories, they were created in an AC room based on the secondary sources, what is called as armchair anthropology. And here a first full-fledged interdisciplinary study of a particular community has happened in 1898. Okay, and that's a turning point in the history of anthropology and the birth of modern anthropology here. Okay, then a similar kind of expedition was done but single-handedly by another person, Franz Boas, that is Baffin Island expedition. Okay, so Franz Boas studied here the community called as Inuits or Eskimos. He wrote a book called as the Central Eskimo. So Boa basically made a very rough, challenging journey, and he basically landed up in the place in the northeast side of the North America, wherein he basically encountered a group of people, the Eskimos, that is, or the Central Eskimos. And sorry, the book is the Central Eskimo. Now he, just like W.H.R. Rivers, he studied them and he found that they have the same intellect as the people of Europe. So he says that the good or the evil is as much in them as much it is in us. And good and evil is not biological. Good and evil is basically something that is inculcated. So that means anybody who is rude, anybody who is uh, say barbaric or primitive, it's not because of their brain, it is because of their training. So it's because of their historical experiences. So they are as good as and evil as the Europeans are. Okay, so that is why he basically tried to show that they should not be ranked, they should be understood in their own cultural context. Okay, so that's one of the other uh, turning point in the history of anthropology, that is the Baffin Island expedition. Now, with this entry of Franz Boas, W.H.R. Rivers, it was now understood that the anthropological studies, they are relatively ethnocentric, they are not very much say credible in nature, and it introduced two major ideas. The first one is cultural relativism, because of Franz Boas, the study of Baffin Island, and then later on the study of Quakeyutes. And then the second one is the essentiality of fieldwork in the anthropological studies. Any community that has to be studied in the natural habitat rather than say creating some kind of ideas based on secondary sources. Okay, so fieldwork studies came up, and the third, or say the icing on the cake, was the entry of Malinowski, who basically introduced the method of fieldwork called as participant observation, one step ahead. Okay, so these are the three major turning points: entry of say the Torres Strait expedition, the entry of Franz Boas, and the third, that is the Malinowski's entry and introduction of the method of participant observation, and that's how the modern anthropology started to evolve. अब उसके बाद आप देखोगे कि एक नई एंट्री होती है, ओके, एंड इट इज बिकॉज ऑफ फ्रांस बो ओनली, दैट इज द एंट्री ऑफ फीमेल स्कॉलर्स. Okay, when the female scholars they enter up, say like culture and personality school, Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, Cora Dubois, it is then the anthropological studies become more and more inclusive in nature. Reason being, abhi tak jitni bhi anthropological studies or field work were being done, they were done by male, and hence when they were done by male, they were not able to discuss certain issues that were female centric, say sexuality, menstruation, pregnancy, birth, such kind of issues they were not explored at all. And that is when the entry of the female anthropologists will happen, and certain issues which are female centric will now be discussed, because they now have the access to the female respondents also, female informants also, and they can discuss such kind of issues. And that is when you find that Ruth Benedict talks about the sexuality, Margaret Mead in Coming of Age in Samoa, or Sex and Temperament in Three Primitive Societies. She started to talk about issues which were female centric in nature. And that's how the anthropological studies started to become more and more inclusive, including all the sections of the society, not just the male related topics or male dominated topics. Okay. So this is the birth of modern anthropologist, or sorry, modern anthropology. Then comes the phase of decolonization. So post World War II, what will happen? So this is the fifth phase. So proto-anthro, the pre-anthro, proto-anthro, then the birth of anthro, then the modern anthropology, and then the anthro post World War II. Now, in this particular phase, what actually happens? Decolonization of anthropology will happen. So a new wave of scholars will come up, and they will suggest that the anthropological theories or anthropological knowledge or data that has been collected has been influenced by the colonial mindset. Okay, so it has some kind of a colonial hangover. The data that were created, the theories that were created to benefit a section of the society, the colonial masters, and that's why they have some kind of a power element. They have some kind of a power hegemony over it, and that's why this needs to be taken up or taken away from it. And that is when the existing frameworks will be challenged. अब एक उसका perception ये भी था कि that before say World War II, structural functionists used to be the most important theory, so or one of the best theory that is in anthropology. Reason, it was able to explain all the institutions, saying that yes, every institution exists, and the purpose of the institution is to maintain existing social structure, to maintain stability. But when Second World War happened, so one after the other, the institutions started to collapse. Say League of Nations and various other institutions, various treaties, they all got collapsed, and the entire world was in chaos. And say atom bombs were dropped. So everybody started to question the structural functions. कि तुम तो बोले थे institution का काम stability लाना है. How did this war happen? How did this entire chaos happen? How did the atom bombs were dropped, and so on and so forth. So the entire structural functions theory was wiped up, and then came this rise of what is called as the conflict theories in anthropology. What is this conflict theories? Structure functions presented the culture as a very homogeneous, harmonious entity, that people are living in harmony, there is no conflict in the society, everybody accepts their status, everybody performs their role, and that's how the stability in the society is say established. So you must have read this question, the Redcliffe Brown idea of status, role, and the social institution. This may you have to write like the social institution gives the status, and a person is supposed to behave in certain particular manner, that is the role. And when he behaves, person having a status behaves in an expected behavior, that is role, performs a role, eventually the society remains stable. Okay, so that was the idea, that is showing the society in a very harmonious fashion कि सब कुछ बढ़िया है, हर किसी को जो स्टेटस मिला है वो एक्सेप्ट कर रहा है एंड उसके हिसाब से बिहेव कर रहा है, एंड इवेंचुअली सोसाइटी स्टेबल रह रही है. बट देन द कॉन्फ्लिक्ट स्कॉलर्स विल कम एंड दे विल से दैट कि नो, anthropology society has an inherent conflict. There might be conflict between the genders, there might be conflict between the classes. Okay, and this conflict will become the cause of social changes. So like the Marxists, they talk about the conflict between the classes, the capitalist class and the labor class, the bourgeois and the proletariats. Or the feminist scholars, they talk about the conflict between the genders, the male and the female conflict, and that is the reason for the change. And then another set of conflict scholars that is there in our syllabus, the postmodernism, who basically don't talk about the conflict between the section of the society, but they are talking about the conflict between the ideas. Okay, that any idea, say they basically pick up the idea of, like you must have heard about Derrida. We'll do it in more detail. Derrida deconstruction. So Derrida's idea of deconstruction is a critique of binary opposites. So he says that the society has been made to think in the form of binary opposite, and not just the binary opposite. One of the binary is considered to be superior to the other. Okay, so for example, we prefer reading over writing. We prefer male over female. We prefer reason over religion. Okay, so binaries में तो हमने society को समझा, but उस binary में one particular binary was considered to be superior over the other. And in this case of hierarchy between the binaries, we started to neglect the merit in the lost binary, or say the inferior binary. So when you consider equality to be better than inequality, you are basically ignoring the merit in the inequality. There is a lot of merit that is there in the inequality. For example, if there is no inequality, what's the point of preparing for civil services? If you get the same perks as a peon, will you be preparing for the civil services? It is because of the hierarchy you are preparing for the civil services. It's because of the hierarchy there is better decision making that can happen. Now, if every civil servant is equal, the one who is basically a peon and the one who is a chief secretary, if they are equal, they get all the perks and privileges. Will there be a system that will be functional? No. That means inequality also has some kind of merit. Okay, पर equality को आपने inequality से superior बताया है. And in all such kind of binaries, one idea has been projected to be superior to the other. And due to this, the inferior idea and the merit in it is basically being lost. So ideas may conflict hai. Okay, and any idea in the society does not exist without conflict. That is what the deconstruction will talk about. Okay, when you deconstruct any kind of anthropological writings, you will find that there is some kind of conflict in the ideas, and one particular idea has been privileged over the other. वो एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट के ओपिनियंस में एक पर्टिकुलर आइडिया को प्रिविलेज दिया गया है एंड दूसरे आइडिया को नेग्लेक्ट किया गया है. And while neglecting this, that neglected idea's merit has been lost. So that's what deconstruction will try to discover in the already existing anthropological text. Okay, we'll discuss more about deconstruction later on. Don't worry about that. Postmodernism mein Derrida, I'll talk about it and I'll give you more examples there. Then the new approaches in anthropology will come up because of this phase. What is that new approach? I'll write it on the next slide. In the new approach, first one is the phenomenology. What is phenomenology? So it's the study of lived experience. So this is an idea that was given by Edmund Husserl, and it simply refers to it's derived from the word phenomenon. Phenomenon means experience, and logos means the study. Okay, so it's a study of lived experiences. So it simply means how do things appear in first person context. So basically, if you want to study a particular society, you will try to create an account in the first person context. That is what is called as the phenomenology. And in order to get this idea of things appearing in the first person context, the process that any anthropologist has to go through is called as bracketing. Now, what is called as bracketing? Bracketing means shielding yourself from any preconceived notion, biases, assumption. That is what is called as bracketing. कि मतलब I'll just shed off any other thoughts, no preconceived thoughts के साथ मैं study करूंगा. Okay, and I'll shield myself from those preconceived notions, biases, assumptions, nothing. I'll just try to be as neutral as possible. Okay, so that is what is called as bracketing. Okay, so here, uh, let me give you some example. So there was a study by an Indian anthropologist named Veena Das, and this is in a book called as Life in Words. So she wanted to study the victims of 1984 riots, okay, that anti-Sikh riots that happened in Delhi after the assassination of Indira Gandhi. So she wanted to study the life of victims of 1984 anti-Sikh riots, and she did a field work in a particular colony of Delhi, that is Bhajanpura. So it's a slum area, or say an area largely dominated by the Sikhs, but it's considered to be a tier 3 kind of a colony. So it's more like a slum kind of a colony. Okay. Now, in this Bhajanpura study, she didn't wanted to record what actually happened. She was not going to understand कि क्या क्या हुआ, किसके साथ क्या क्या हुआ, but she wanted to see how the victims see their life. Okay, so rather than just recording that the atrocities that were committed on the victims, or say just recording them as the passive victims about something that has happened on a grand scale, she wanted to understand how each of the victim actually sees his or her life, and say she wanted to record that key lived experiences of every victim that she interviewed. And in the key lived experiences, she talked about three major aspects. First one, embodied suffering. So she says that women bear trauma of sexual violence in silence. Okay. And their bodies, they have become site of pain and memory. Okay. Or they basically, their bodies are the evidences of their exploitation. Now, this was a question also in last year mains, culture and embodiment. What does it means, embodiment? The repeated practice of culture makes some practices seem natural or biological. Okay, so you practice something so frequently or so much so that these behaviors, although they are trained behaviors, although they are learned behaviors, but they then seem to be natural, biological लगने लग जाते हैं. And that is what ingrained culture. Okay, that is some particular behavior seems so ingrained. जैसे आप बोलते हो ना gut feeling. Now, what is that gut feeling? Is it because of your some DNA or something, or is it because of your some blur memory, something that is in the subconscious mind? You might have read something somewhere, but then you call it as gut feeling, not the subconscious thinking. Okay, and that is showing that it's more like biological act, but it is not a biological act. It's something because of your socialization, but it is so much deeply ingrained in you that it seems to be natural. आप मतलब आपको लगता है कि आपका natural inflex है वैसे. Say for example the way of sitting, the way of talking, the way of eating the food, or say the smell that you have, or say the perception of the smell. So some people might like some kind of smell while the others might not like the smell. Now people might say that कि नहीं ये तो natural है कि that this odor perception might be natural in nature. No, the odor perception is completely social or cultural. The person who likes a particular kind of smell might be exposed to that kind of odor from the childhood days, and that's why he might not find that odor to be unpleasant in nature. So for example, the one who works in a butchery or a slaughterhouse, he will never find that odor to be uh, unpleasant, because he has been exposed to that odor. His body is very much used to it. And anybody visiting a slaughterhouse all of a sudden, okay, he will decide, he will have the tendency to puke. Why? And you are saying that, there are different people, some people are more sensitive, some people are less sensitive. No, it's not because of the biology, it's because of the culture. It's the degree of exposure that we had. So that is what is called as embodiment. The body becomes a site of expression of culture, and a lot of behaviors, they become, or they seem to be natural or biological in nature. And this is what happened because of the rapes also. Their body became the site of pain and the memory. Their body reminds them about the activities that they had to suffer. Not just the activities that they had to suffer. Every time they had to go for a testimony, or in the courts, or in the medical say rooms and all, their body was examined, and that examination of the body was a reminder about what had happened to them. So that behavior is getting ingrained. Although it's a cultural behavior, it was external, but now their body reminds them about what actually happened. That's the ingrained feeling that has happened. Okay, so that is the phenomenology. The second one is bureaucracy as disempowerment. So how do they see bureaucracy? So here Veena thus writes that people see that, or people say that the state is not absent, but it is just that it is present in a unhelpful manner. Okay, state is not absent, but state presence is unhelpful in nature. In fact, being seen by the state does not guarantee welfare, but it often means more vulnerability. Okay, so if you are noticed by the state, doesn't mean that you will be getting your privileges, perks, rehabilitation. No. If you are noticed by the state, there is a higher chance that you might be eliminated, that you might be targeted, you might not be able to get anything, whatever you deserve. So being seen by the state is not a sense of relief, but being seen by the state is like a sense of threat. Okay, so that is how they see the state. And the last one, disempowerment is not just structural, it is felt. So it's not just the structural arrangements, that the position of the people, they are getting disempowered because of the structure, that there is a lot of bureaucracy, there is a lot of red tapeism. No, they are made to feel this disempowerment in everyday acts. That is what that it's writing about. Disempowerment is not just structural, it is felt in long queues, the waiting lines, and then the rejections of the request, and then in the words which are used by the bureaucrats to talk to them. Okay, the testings that they have to go through, the multiple testimony that they have to give, again and again recall the same incident in front of different persons, that is the sense of disempowerment. And it is not only because of the structure that they are weak, but it's because of the process that they have to go through. And every time they are made to feel that they are disempowered, they are humiliated, they are nothing in front of the states. Okay, so that is the phenomenological study of the victims of anti-Sikh rights by Veena Das. Okay, setting the first person lived experience. Similarly, there is a scholar. अब देखो यहाँ पे I am talking about the phenomenology. You can use this example. Suppose if there is a question on phenomenology, now you can talk about this example in culture and embodiment also. कि कैसे cultural behaviors they get deeply ingrained in the body, and the body is more like a you can say text जिसपे culture लिख दिया गया है. And the body behavior might seem natural, but it's because of the, so it's like you can understand that कि body is like a hardware, computer है वो, and culture is like the operating system. Now, a lot of things that the computer does, it seems to be natural that it's the machine that is doing. No, but it's the software that is making the machine do like that. Okay. In the same way, body is like a blank slate, and जिसपे कुछ लिखा गया. And that writing, that text that was written on that blank slate makes the body act in a particular manner. And we a lot of times take it for granted, thinking that it is biological. But no, it's because of the deep ingrained culture, or because of the recurrent practices, or multiple times we are doing the same thing, these kind of activities seem natural or biological in us. Okay, and that is the culture and embodiment. Okay, now similarly there is a scholar, Nancy Shepherd Hughes. She did a study in some tier 3 town in Brazil, very poor town in Brazil, and that was published in a book called as Death Without Weeping. Now, what she writes or she finds in this particular book, actually, she did a phenomenological study of motherhood, poverty, and suffering in Brazil. Now, what is this? Somebody saying, so if possible, please provide the handout at least one day before the scheduled class so that we could go through it. I'll try. Okay. So, in this, what is the study that she tries to highlight? Phenomenology of motherhood, poverty, and say suffering in Brazil. So basically, she found that the females, or say because of the extreme poverty, the females in this particular town, they practice what is called as triage. What is this triage? This might be a new word for you. It is usually used in some kind of a medical terminology, wherein in case of emergency, the doctors tries to kind of do something that might enhance the chances of survival of that particular patient. Means एकदम last moment try करते हैं. Now, in case of society, triage means that they basically prioritize, or say have an emotional attachment only to those children who have chances of survival. They don't emotionally attach to the children who basically are born weak. These children are considered to be uh, born to be dead, and they basically are considered to be the angels that wants to fly. And that's why if the children is born weak, the mothers don't develop any emotional attachment towards that child. They might not even feed the child, they might not even care for the child, they might actually reject the child. Now, this is a kind of a rejection of the Western belief system that motherhood is natural. Motherhood is, say, biological, that just because the woman bears the child in her womb for 9 months, when she gives birth to it, she develops a kind of feeling towards the child. Okay, that's what the Western belief. But now the phenomenological study of this motherhood here, Nancy Shipper Hughes finds that ki motherhood is not natural. Motherhood basically depends upon the chances of survival of the child. If the child is going to survive, the mother will develop emotions. But if the child is weak and it's so the mother will not invest herself emotionally. And in case of death of the child also, they don't cry, and that's why the name of the book, Death Without Weeping. Okay, so it's like कि ये जो motherhood है, that is not biological, that is culturally ingrained in them. But this motherhood is embodied now. Okay, so it seems like it's natural कि ऐसा है, but it's not natural. It's something that is because of their cultural experiences, because of the extreme poverty, because of the structural violence that they face. That is, government is very poor, the welfare schemes are not working, the corruption is there, and institutional deliveries are absent. And because of this, there is a high infant mortality, and because of this, they have developed this kind of motherhood. And what is this motherhood? They don't have emotional attachment to the child, that is weak and it's deemed to die. They will develop, or say, in fact, in this society, a child is considered to be born only, or say, a child is considered to be, say, they will develop some kind of emotional attachment only if child passes a particular critical age. उसके बाद मतलब chances होता है कि ये बच जाएगा. Now they will start emotionally investing themselves with respect to that child. Else before that, no child, they don't have any kind of emotion. अब ये देखने में तो biological है, but it is because of the cultural aspects, and that is the first person study of the motherhood in Brazil. So that is the Nancy Shepard Hughes. Now this question can be talked about. So for example, last year एक question आया था with respect to, say, medical anthropology का एक question था. हाँ, नहीं नहीं नहीं, डेविड बेकर्स, वो बारकर है वैसे तो. I'll take that question जब epidemiology में, so I'll talk about it. I don't remember that. Now, some integration of ecological and so perspective with respect to something like this. ऐसा कोई question था. Yes, something like this. Now, the other thing that developed in anthropology, say in the post Second World War, is reflexivity. So reflexivity is a sense of introspection. That means an anthropologist will introspect his thoughts, his assumptions, his biases that he had during the field work, and how these baggages actually influence his work. That is what is called as reflexivity. अपने thought process को reflect back करना and analyze his own study, that how his thought process has influenced his work. That is what is called as the reflexivity, or a simple language way, it's a sense of introspection. An anthropologist will think, or say will ponder that what I was thinking when I was doing the research, and how that thinking or how my socio-economic cultural biases or socialization has impacted my research, my findings, my conclusions. Okay, and then mention it, that okay, this is my background, this is from where I come, this is my education, this is my economic background, and you should be, and that definitely would have impacted my research, you should be cautious while reading it. Okay, so that brings the anthropological research more credible, or makes it more credible. Moreover, that's an acceptance that there cannot be just one way of expressing certain ideas. There can be multiple ways of expressing the same idea depending upon what is the background of that person. Okay. Moreover, there is a statement that I'll make, that reflexivity blurs the distinction between say, the observer and the observed. Reflexivity blurs the distinction between the observer and the observed. What does this mean? Ki the one who is being studied and the one who studies, you cannot distinguish because of the reflexivity. Now, how? Basically, when I am doing a reflexive thinking, whom am I studying? I am studying myself. Basically, I am thinking what I was thinking when I was doing the research, and how my thinking has impacted my research. So, am I studying somebody else? No. I am studying myself, and that's why the distinction between the observer and the observed becomes distinct. And extreme reflexivity will lead to one particular kind of research called as autoethnography. That is ethnography of oneself. Just like there is an autobiography, there is an autoethnography. So that is an ethnography of oneself. And that is because of the extreme reflexivity. जब आप अपने बारे में सोच रहे हो, अपने biases के बारे में सोच रहे हो, and then you are thinking that how this bias would have impacted your research, you are doing a research upon yourself. You are writing about yourself. Okay, and that is what is called as the autoethnography. So this is the case of modern, say post World War II anthropology. Okay, introduction of new approaches, specifically phenomenology and reflexivity, and that makes anthropological research more and more credible in nature. Okay, so that's the summary of what actually happened in this 200 years when the anthropology was born and how it has evolved over a period of time post Second World War. Okay, now we'll talk about the colonial hangover in anthropology. So, in case of anthropology, uh, there has been some kind of colonial hangover, say, because the discipline originated during the colonial era, and it basically was funded by the colonial powers, and that's why the data that was originated, that actually had some kind of colonial hangovers. Okay, and you will find that one or the other way, this kind of questions, they are coming up. Okay, last year there was a question that how the anthropological studies became more scientific, something like this. There was a question कि कैसे scientific ideas आने लगे post World War II. So that is what changed after the Second World War. Change was the decolonization. And when decolonization happened, the academia also got decolonized because there was no pressure from the colonial powers to create certain kind of knowledge. Okay, and initially the colonial knowledge was created, or the knowledge was created to support the ones who are funding their studies. And in case of anthropology also, this tag of colonial hangover is there. Okay, now how to justify, say suppose anthropology has a colonial hangover, how will you justify this point? So first one, you should talk about the history of anthropology, that it originated during the colonial era, and the first generation, or say the initial founders hain, the ones who created the theories, they all come from a particular background. And what is that? WASP background, what is called as white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That means European white men basically were the ones who created the entire discipline. That means there is a background, or say there is a mental background that is already there, and there is some kind of a thinking that they basically were having, and that's why they created a certain set of or certain kind of knowledge. WASP male. Okay. Now another thing that you can talk about in case of colonial aspects कैसे visible हैं. So first one, the colonial background basically made them create certain tools to classify or rank the societies, right? So अगर आप classification और rank में उन्होंने labels create किए. So first label, if the first theory, savagery, barbarism, civilization, so they started to rank the society, giving them the names like savage, barbaric, or civilization. Or say the label like primitive cultures, showing certain cultures to be old, outdated, fossilized, static, backward, right? So primitive culture. The term like tribe was created by them. So in order to study the communities of India, tribes, aborigines. Okay, so these terms, they definitely have some kind of a inherent meaning or implicit meaning of a community being backward. Okay, so tribes, aborigines, and then certain labels like criminal tribes. That also was the work of the anthropologist, and because of the colonial era. And why these tags were being created? Okay, so they were created, the knowledge that was created to justify colonization. to show this society backward and to justify the rule. So the idea of white man's burden. I just forgot to mention one particular other classification, races, which was shown to be a valid biological criteria. Okay, so these categories were created by anthropologists, shown to be scientific, shown to be logical, and then this knowledge, इसका purpose क्या था? Basically to justify colonization, the idea of white man's burden, that we are the civilized people, and it's now our responsibility is on our shoulders to civilize the rest of the world. So we are doing a good to the rest of the world. Why this justification was required? Because parallelly in Europe, it was liberty, equality, fraternity that was the ideal, and correspondingly they were trying to colonize the world. So what would they say to their people? They need to have some kind of explanation if they're talking about liberty, equality, fraternity at their place. So they brought the scientific ideas that justified the colonization. That academia was entirely controlled by them, that would generate theories that would justify the act of colonization. Okay, next, if we talk about the sites of work, the anthropological theories, the data that we see in the initial phase, वो कहाँ पे थे? What are the sites? What are the places that have been studied? Africa, Australia, North America, all are colonies where there was a dominance of whites or Europeans, and that would guarantee the safety of the anthropologist or the scholar. And definitely that shows that there is a power equation. Like Redcliffe Brown studied Andamanis, he gave the idea of structure functionalism, like the Andaman Islanders in that book, but he never mentioned a single line about the colonial rule and the impact of the colonial rule. That a lot of Andamanis, they died because of the diseases carried by the Britishers, but he never mentioned about them. Or Tobrianders, that was studied by Malinowski, and Malinowski talks about the happy-go-lucky type of culture, बढ़िया coolaring कर रहे हैं, but he never mentioned about the presence of any colonial power. So there were four missionaries, traders, administrators who were on the Tobriand Island along with Malinowski. But the Tobriand Argonauts of Western Pacific, that book doesn't talks about it. Okay, so that particular idea was completely missing. Okay, so the sites were colonies, and definitely there was a power asymmetry in the ones that were being studied and the ones who were studying them. So the ones who were studying them, definitely they had like a upper hand. Okay. Next one, fieldwork informant dynamics. So informant was considered to be inferior. The field worker or the anthropologist was considered to be the one who is the creator of the knowledge. But actually the knowledge was created by the informant. But उसको तो एक side position दे दी गई कि भाई तेरे से थोड़ा बहुत लिखेंगे, बाकी ये knowledge तो मैंने create की. So there was a power equation there also between the field worker and the informant, and there was a field worker hegemony that was there. Okay, but now later on you will see that postmodernism challenges this. Now informant term ही हटा दिया गया, and the term that is used is collaborator rather than an informant. Okay, so that is bringing some kind of parity between the anthropologist and the one who provides the information, who assists. So that is the field worker informant dynamics was also showing the power hegemony or the colonial mindset was there. Okay. So this is the colonial hangover that you will see in anthropological studies. Now we'll talk about the nature of the subject, that is anthropology. So because there is a question that is coming up always, like holistic hai ya fragmented hai, what kind of nature that subject has. So first we'll talk about holism as a nature. So in case of holism, simply it means that study of humans from all possible dimensions. That is what is called as holism. Now, this approach in anthropology says that any aspect of the humans cannot be understood in isolation. Any aspect, so human beings can be understood in whole, and in that whole, every aspect is linked to the other aspects. It cannot be understood in isolation. You cannot understand the human biology in isolation. You have to understand the biology in respect to the culture. Okay, so that's why the holistic approach basically is a reflection of biocultural, or say reflection of the holistic approach is the biocultural understanding of humans. Or say, in fact, the language is not merely a cultural behavior, it's a result of culture and biology. We have certain anatomical features, that's why we are able to speak. And also, along with the intelligence and the anatomical features, there are certain cultural aspects that shapes the language. So that is, any aspects of the human cannot be understood in isolation, and that demands a holistic study. And the only discipline, or say something that distinguishes anthropology from any other discipline, is this holistic nature, understanding the society, or say culture, or humans from all possible dimensions. The holism is reflected in anthropology in two aspects. One is basically holism across, or shown across, four fields of anthropological studies. Okay, so that is studying humans from four possible domains. One is the physical anthropology, talking about the human biology, human evolution, all such kind of things. The second is the human socio-cultural anthropology, talking about the humans culture, society, development of it. And then linguistic anthropology, talking about human language, its development and its relation to the other aspects like biology and culture. And then the archaeological anthropology, that is studying the human past. Okay, and then trying to develop, or say develop linkages with biological as well as the cultural aspects of human life. So that is holism shown through the four field. And the second one, the holism in cultural studies of humans. So, SIF culture, maybe we practice holistic studies. For example, one aspect of the culture cannot be understood in isolation. We cannot just study the religion, we just cannot study economics or politics. All these aspects are interconnected, and that's why there has to be a detailed ethnography or field work that has to be done. Okay, so that is the two types of holism that you will see in anthropological studies. One seen across multiple branches, the other seen across in the cultural studies also. Okay, now how is this holism seen, or what are the features of this holism? The first feature of holism in anthropology is interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approach. So anthropology borrows from multiple sciences. So we use principles of genetics, we use principles of chemistry, that is dating, all such kind of radiometric datings and all such kind of things. We use the principles of geology, that is archaeological excavation, say stratigraphy and all such kind of thing. We use the principle of psychology, psychometric testing, or say psychoanalysis, that we have done in culture personality school. Psychology. We use the principle of medicinal sciences also, like the pedigree analysis. Okay, so medical sciences, or genetics screening, genetic counselings. Okay, so these, we are using the principles from multiple domains or multiple disciplines, bringing them together and trying to get a holistic picture of the mankind, rather than just studying them in a specialized manner. So this is the first feature of holism. Second, due to this holism, there is an emphasis on contextual understanding. How? Basically, when one particular aspect of the humans cannot be understood in isolation, you have to understand that aspect in relation to the others, and that will promote the contextual understanding of any phenomena. Okay, आप सिर्फ religion को नहीं समझ सकते, आपको religion को समझना है तो you have to understand the past of the humans, you have to understand the present or the economic or the political aspects of the human, and maybe then you will be able to understand the religion. So if we are say polytheistic, we worship nature gods, so maybe it cannot be understood without understanding that India is largely an agrarian economy. Okay, and that linkage, or say it cannot be understood basically without understanding the politics. The entire politics, the history of nation has been built on the communal roots, that on the first day of independence there was basically a big communal violence, Noakhali and all, and that's why religion is very dear to us. So आप समझो कि the political aspects or economic aspects को ignore करके we cannot understand the religion, and that's why this holistic approach only will make us go for the contextual understanding or deeper understanding. And because of this contextual understanding, it also promotes relativism, because that is what relativism is, that any cultural behavior has to be understood in its own context rather than by some generalized norms. That is cultural relativism. Then this holistic approach also helps understand temporal depth. Temporal depth means past and present over a period of time. Okay, so that temporal depth can also be understood through this holistic features only. Okay, and then this holistic features helps us in cross cultural comparisons. Okay, so this cross cultural comparison, because we are studying any particular society in complete, so we can compare these societies, but you cannot compare the religions of two societies, you cannot compare simply the marriages of two societies. You can compare the society with one another if you have a holistic data about it. Okay, so that cross cultural comparison becomes more and more relevant when you have the holistic data. Not just that, this holism basically helps us integrate the ethic and emic perspectives, or what we can say, the scientific and the local perspective. That is what holism is. You need to understand the society from the point of view of the practitioners, but at the same time you need to understand the society from the some general theories, general ideas from the point of view of the observer also, by certain parameters that can be applied to all the societies. So that is the integration of ethic and emic view, or local, or say the scientific view also, or and that integration basically will give you a more credible picture of the society. Okay, more clearer picture of the society, making your studies more authentic, because ethic has some kind of limitations, that you will not be able to understand the cultural behavior in the context. आप outsiders view देख रहे हो. Insiders might have some kind of biases, that nobody is going to highlight the flaws of their culture, they will always have like the goods of their culture. Okay, ethic and emic combination can give you a more clearer picture of the culture, and it is coming because of the holistic nature of the subject. So this is the features of the holistic. Now when the anthropology began, say for example the modern anthropology beginning, I told you about Torres Strait expedition, and that is the beginning of holistic study. uh, Initially there was multidisciplinary approach, initially there was more holism in anthropological studies, every aspect was considered to be connected to other aspects and cannot be understood in isolation. But over a period of time, anthropological branches, they started to become specialized, and because of this specialization, anthropological studies became fragmented, and due to this fragmentation, the knowledge developed in silos. Okay, so anthropological knowledge were developing, but these knowledge were getting siloed. Okay, कि मतलब ये political anthropology expert है, this is a religious anthropology expert, or say somebody is a biological anthropology expert concerned only about evolution, concerned only about political aspects, concerned only about religious aspect, concerned only about language. Okay, so linguistic scholars were there who were only focusing upon the language. Okay, and this is what actually happened, that the anthropology got more and more specializations, more and more sub branches started to come up, and specialized studies started to develop there. And because of this, the knowledge that were getting generated was getting generated in silos, means आपस में क्या linkages है, that was not being talked about, and that is when the fragmentation of the subject happened. Okay, and there was a question, that is with respect to this challenge to holism. So in order to something like that, you need to reinvigorate the holistic spirit of anthropology, something like this. So that is talking about the historical changes that have happened in anthropology, that initially it was holistic, but because of the specialization sub branches coming up, eventually this holism got broken down, the fragmentation, specialization happened, and the knowledge that was being generated, that was generated in silos. Okay, so how to reinstate, or say, or why to reinstate basically the holistic nature of anthropology? What's the reason for it? Why basically anthropology ka holistic hona zaruri hai? Okay, so the need for restoring the holistic nature of anthropology, the first is the reason itself, that it's the increased fragmentation of the subject, and because of the increased fragmentation, we are not able to generate a clear picture of any society or any human group, or say largely about humanity. The clear picture is not present because of the increased fragmentation. Second major why we need to restore the holism, it is that the modern problems that the world is facing cannot be solved by a single discipline, requires multidisciplinary approach. And that's why you need to have that multidisciplinary approach reinstated in the anthropological studies. Okay, for example, COVID-19, was it merely a medical problem? Was it a cultural problem only? Was it a political problem that can be solved by some kind of political interventions? Was it, or was there a multidisciplinary approach, economic, political, medical, cultural, or maybe the linguistic, that has to be brought? So for example, in the linguistic aspects, say you will see the changes like social distancing, namaste, rather than shaking hands or maintaining the social distance. Okay, so the way of communication altered, the way the messages have to be communicated to the people in order to maintain that social distance, that also has to be designed. So it requires some kind of linguistic interventions also, कि कैसे आपने ad design की, कैसे आपने messages design किए so that it appeals to the people. There was vaccine hesitancy with respect to COVID. How will you convey the people that this vaccine is good for you? Although अब तो पता चल गया कि vaccine was not good, but still, at least in the exam case, we can say, so vaccine hesitancy, that requires effective messaging, and that required linguistic interventions. Then cultural interventions, a lot of cultural behaviors like मंदिर में जाना, भीड़ लगाना, और बहुत सारे शादियों में basically that was violating the social distancing norms, that definitely would be leading to spread of COVID virus. Okay, or a lot of cultural behaviors, basically the food habits, that was originally the reason for the rise of COVID virus. Say wet markets in China, you must have heard about that origin of that COVID virus, or consumption of bats. So it also required some kind of cultural interventions so that such kind of pandemic should not originate in the future. And then we also required some kind of economic interventions, political interventions, and that is what requires, or say genetics की भी जरूरत थी, because we need to study the genetics of the virus so that we can actually develop some kind of effective vaccines. So all such kind of things can only happen when we have a holistic discipline. The epidemiology is that holistic understanding of that disease, its surveillance, the cultural causes, the effective political, medical, economic interventions that has to be done. Okay, so all the global problems cannot be solved by a single solution. It requires interdisciplinary approach, and that's why we need to restore the uh, third case. Why there is a need to restore the holistic feature of anthropology? It is because anthropology was considered to be the only discipline that would basically act as a bridge between the natural science and humanities. So there is a set of subjects that are basically completely into humanities, and a set of subjects that are labeled as natural sciences like physics, chemistry, biology. Anthropology is a bridge between natural sciences and humanities, and restoring the holistic nature of the subject will basically reinstate anthropology as a bridge between the natural sciences and the say social sciences, or say humanities, because it is only in anthropology that we borrow the methods and methodologies from the humanities. We basically have the 10 approaches of the humanities like phenomenology, reflexivity, okay, cultural relativism, value system ऐसे हैं, हमारे methods वैसे हैं. At the same time, we are also using the knowledge of the modern sciences like genetics, archaeology, geology, medical sciences, and that's why anthropology was acting as a bridge. But अगर anthropology ही specialize हो गई, imagine. So in that case, that bridge will be broken between the humanities and the natural sciences. And that's why to make it, to restore that bridge, we should ensure that holistic nature is retained or it's brought back. Okay. So this is why we need to actually reinvigorate or restore the holistic nature. But you need to understand the background why this condition came, because of the specialization, fragmentation of the knowledge that happened because of development of various sub branches in anthropology. Getting this point? So this is the holistic nature and the need to restore it. Now one particular topic that comes up, basically ये हर साल या हर alternative year they ask a question on this, that is the comparison of anthropology with various disciplines. Okay, so I'll just write multiple disciplines. I'll tell you some basic headings that you need to follow. अगर आपको उस समय कुछ भी याद नहीं है तो ये headings याद रखना, और इन headings के ऊपर 20 words भी आप लिख लोगे तो eventually you will be able to write the answer. So first, anthro, socio, psychology, history, and medicine. Okay, now whenever you begin that comparison, so first, that is the definition. So what is anthropology? Holistic study of humans and humanity. Okay, from all possible dimensions. आप उसकी और भी कोई elaborate definition लिखना चाहो तो आप लिख सकते हो. So that is और इस टाइप का क्वेश्चन आए तो डोंट एवर फॉरगेट टू ग्लोरीफाई एंथ्रोपोलॉजी. ओके, व्हाई आई एम सेइंग दिस कि एंथ्रोपोलॉजी का जो प्रोफेसर है जो आपकी कॉपी इवैल्यूएट कर रहा है उसकी जिंदगी में कुछ ही खुशी के पल हैं, और उसमें से एक ये है कि कोई उसके सब्जेक्ट की बहुत तारीफ करे. ओके, कि तुमने जिंदगी में कुछ तो अच्छा किया है, even if you are checking the copy, but still you have done something good by pursuing anthropology, and at least try to glorify anthropology like कि भाई anthropology जैसा कोई subject ही नहीं. Okay, so that is, you should try to over glorify the subject. So in this case, first the definition: holistic study of humans and humanity across time and space. Then the definition of socio. So the study of society social groups and institutions post industrial era. Okay, so a small section of the human life, and that too a small subset of it, that is society, social group, social institution, how they have changed, how they have transformed after industrial revolution, that is what sociology talks about. Okay, then psychology, it's a study of human mind and behavior associated to it. Then history, it's a study of human past through remains, records, and civilizations, or say events. So it can be through archaeological remains or some written records, or through certain events that have happened in the past. So that is history. And then the medicine, it's a study of human body, health, disease, and its cure. सिंपल सी डेफिनेशन है, नॉट अब आप इसमें आई हैव सीन अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल, दे विल रिमेंबर ए स्कॉलर जिन्होंने मेडिसिन को डिफाइन किया है. ओके, or they will try to write a scholar who has given a definition of psychology, who has given a definition of sociology and anthropology, and आप सोचोगे कि anthropology की definition जब तक scholarly नहीं हो तब तक अच्छा नहीं है. ओके, ठीक है, मतलब बुक्स में अच्छा लगता है, बट एग्जाम में कहाँ तक याद करोगे, कितना याद करोगे. ओके, एंड एग्जामिनर को आपको ये बताना है कि आप एंथ्रोपोलॉजी को समझते हो, या फिर ये बताना है कि किसी स्कॉलर ने एंथ्रोपोलॉजी को कैसे डिफाइन किया. हाउ डज दैट मैटर एक्चुअली. सो डोंट गो इनटू दैट कि अब एंथ्रोपोलॉजी की डेफिनेशन भी किसी स्कॉलर की ही याद करूंगा या उसका नाम भी याद करूंगा. दैट विल क्रिएट एन एडिशनल प्रेशर. डोंट, यू डोंट नीड इट एट ऑल. ओके, नाउ the second thing that you will be using to compare the subject is the scope and the unit of analysis. Scope simply means syllabus. Okay, so that is the area that we are concerned with. What are the areas that we actually study in those subject. Okay, so in case of anthropology, the scope is holistic and it studies culture, biology, language, and the archaeological or prehistory of mankind. Okay, so that is what we study in case of anthropology: culture, biology, language, and the prehistory. That is the 4 branches. Then in case of sociology, what is the scope? What are the syllabus? Again, a repetition of this, that is, we will be studying the social institutions, the social groups, usually in the post-industrial era. So modern societies will be studied rather than the prehistoric societies. And the focus is only on the social aspects rather than, say, the biological, cultural, language, ये सब नहीं, just the social aspects is being studied. So it's a very specific or specialized study. You have to mention. अब देखो यही तरीका है सटल तरीके से अपने सब्जेक्ट की तारीफ करने का ना, कि ये थोड़ा सा लिमिटेड है. It's like a subset kind of thing. Okay, what is being studied in anthropology, basically it's a subset. Socio is subset, psychology is a subset एक तरीके से. Okay, then what is the scope of psychology? So basically study of mental patterns of individual, groups, and mental health. That is the scope. Then scope of history, basically we study the chronology, the cause and effect of certain events, and also historiography. What is historiography? Different ways of writing history. So there are multiple schools of writing the history. One is called as positivism, जो बोलता है कि chronology में history लिखो. Okay, You don't have to interpret anything, just write the history in chronology, the events as they have happened. Okay, then there is Marxist approach to write history. So basically, and interpreting the historical incidents from the oppressor and the oppressed point of view, or say binaries mein. Feminist view of writing history, basically that will talk about the females position in the historical events, how their females have been oppressed over a period of time. So females point of view se likhte hain. Then there is another way of writing history that is called as subaltern perspective. Subaltern perspective basically writes from the bottom. Okay, so जैसे ये एक मुंडा रेबेलियन है. So मुंडा रेबेलियन के बारे में एक ब्रिटिश हिस्टोरियन ने लिखा that Mundas revolt or rebel and eventually they were suppressed by the Britishers. So that's a view from the top. But then again, there is somebody who will view the same incident from the bottom. How the Mundas they see their point of, or say they see this kind of incident. Okay, what was their view? So वो कैसे मुंडा rebellion को देखते हैं? How is that a sense of empowerment for them? How that is a sense of liberation for them? वो क्या इसको defeat मानते हैं या वो अपने आप के लिए victory मानते हैं इसको? Okay, so that is the subaltern perspective, that is view from the bottom rather than the view from the top. Okay, so it's the historiography. And then medicine में, so it is the scope is pathology, human anatomy. Pathology is the study of disease, human anatomy, then diagnosis, medicine, all such kind of things should be a scope of the syllabus. Then the third thing that you should be comparing is methods. What are the methods that are being used in, say, these subjects or this discipline? So in case of anthropology, the methods are qualitative and quantitative. So qualitative methods like field work, participant observation, okay, phenomenological approach, interpretive approach, cognitive schools, okay, and quantitative approaches like surveys, census, questionnaire, schedules, all such methods are used collectively. In case of sociology, there is largely quantitative methods that are used, surveys, statistics, census, okay, rather than the qualitative methods. Field work is not something. Now you can mention, मतलब अगर मान लो एंथ्रो सोशो का सवाल आए, तो you can mention that कि sociology has borrowed the qualitative methods from anthropology. At the same time, anthropology has borrowed the quantitative methods from sociology. So the methods of questionnaire, schedule, census, surveys, sampling, that was borrowed by anthropology from sociology. And vice versa, the qualitative methods of field work, participant observation, all such kind of things that were borrowed from anthropology to sociology. Okay. Then in case of psychology, so there are psychological tests that are being done. Okay, so for example, कोरा डुबोई अगर आपने पढ़ा होगा तो उसमें उन्होंने कुछ टेस्ट कराए थे, thematic perception test, ink blot test, okay, or what is called as Rorschach's test. So such kind of psychological test or psychoanalysis that was actually promoted by Sigmund Freud. Okay, ki how there is id, ego and superego, you basically try to analyze that part of the mind. If you don't know this, just know the names only, that is ink blot test, tat or thematic perception test. So these are some of the psychological tests that are being done. History में what are the methods that basically are used? Basically archivals, they are basically research, the textual analysis is being textual analysis, or historiography is again the method of historical studies. Archives को देखना, उनको research करना, और textual analysis जो भी written records हैं, या फिर material analysis or maybe the historiography. Okay, then medicine, what are the major methods? So clinical trials, pedigree analysis, all such kind of methods are used in medicines. Then the time frame. what is the time frame of the study in each of the subject? So in case of anthropology, it is from the prehistory to the present. All the time when the humans existed, that's the time frame of analysis of anthropology. So we are studying the Paleolithic culture to the modern culture. Okay. And in case of sociology, that's the post-industrial time. In case of psychology, that is the present mental condition. आप past में कुछ भी नहीं देखते. It's the contemporary humans. Okay. Then in case of history, it's again the time frame is from prehistory to say modern time. And then in case of medicine, present and the recent past. That is the time frame that you will have. Now, in the last, you can talk about, so suppose आपको दो को compare करना है. So then you can talk about, is there any kind of interdisciplinary linkage? Is there any link between anthro and socio, or anthro or say XYZ subject? So for example, anthro के लिए तो क्या लिखेंगे? For example, in case of socio और anthro में दिखाना है, तो you can talk about overlap of Durkheim's idea in structure functionalism, Emily Durkheim, or overlap of Max Weber's idea in symbolic and interpretive approach. So Clifford Geertz was inspired by Max Weber, and the idea of Max Weber, Verstehen, was actually taken up. We'll talk about what is this Verstehen when I'll be talking about symbolic and interpretive. So these are sociologists whose ideas have inspired the anthropologist. Emily Durkheim से inspire होकर Redcliffe Brown ने structure functionalism का idea दिया. Okay, so he had already done the studies at Andamanis. He read Emily Durkheim, and then eventually उन्होंने Andamanis की study को reinterpret किया from the structure functions point of view, and the book was printed, Andaman Islanders. Okay, so that is, these are the overlap between anthropology and sociology. Psychology and anthropology. Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud is considered to be the father of psychology, and इन्हीं के student थे Abraham Gardner, who basically gave the idea of culture shapes, so primary institution shape basic personality that shapes the secondary institution. So Abraham Gardner in the culture personality school was student of Sigmund Freud. He used the Freud's idea only to understand the personality formation in the society. And Sigmund Freud के student थे Abraham Gardner, and Abraham Gardner की student थी Cora Dubois. Okay, and basically they have, the entire culture personality school have used the idea of Sigmund Freud only to actually develop some kind of psychological anthropology. Okay, so that is the overlap. Then in case of history and anthropology, so there is a particular scholar called as James Scott. So James Scott was the first person to basically use the subaltern perspective. So subaltern was something that was written in used in history to understand a particular event from the bottom. Now he used this subaltern perspective to do a field work in a village in Malaysia. Okay, and he wrote a book called as The Weapons of Weak. Okay, now what is specific about this Weapons of Weak? So when he did the study in Malaysia, a particular village, so what he found that this poor peasants, they are being replaced by two factors from their land. One is the mechanization of agriculture, and second, because of the new tenancy laws that are coming up. And because of these two factors, they are getting replaced from their land. Mechanization, and second is the new tenancy laws. Now, because of this mechanization and new tenancy laws, what actually happens? He wanted to understand, why are they not doing any kind of rebel? Why are they not protesting? Why are not they fighting? लड़ाई क्यों नहीं हो रही? And for that he basically did the field work, stayed among the peasants there. And then he found that the rebel is not proactive, or rebel is not something that is visible, but they are doing the rebel in their forms, or say there is some kind of resistance, although not very much prominent, but definitely they are resisting. So, and how that resistance basically is visible? So basically by false compliance. So if there is some kind of norm, they will just say that okay, okay, hum kar lenge, but they won't do it. Petty thefts, they will try to steal things. Okay, they will try to do some kind of petty crimes, and they will always make the authorities feel that the society is not organized, there is some kind of a threat. So petty thefts, that will be there. Then gossips, character assassinations. So they will be doing the gossips about the higher authorities, they will do the character assassination, they will put some kind of allegations, some fraud allegations and all, which they cannot prove, but they are doing it. And the last one, evasion of taxes. So they try to evade the taxes. Now, he says that these are although weak form of resistances, but this does not require any leadership. This does not require any active organizations, and they can be done by a single individual. And in that case, any individual cannot be prosecuted for it, cannot be caught for it. And that's why he calls this as the weapons of the weak, some passive form of resistance that is against the authority. So they're not making any kind of rebel, ladai nahi kar rahe, but that doesn't mean that they have accepted them. They are showing their resistance, and this resistance is because uh, they do not have the capacity to organize anything, paisa ya intellect ya kuch bhi. So they are doing at the individual level so that they cannot be caught. That does not require any kind of organized leadership or any kind of funding. Okay, so they are resisting. So that is from the point of view of the bottom. So that is the James Scott. Then the last one, that is some kind of overlap between medical sciences and anthropology, epidemiological studies, that is a classic overlap between medical sciences and uh, anthropology. Specifically, one particular scholar, Paul Farmer, you must have heard about his name applied anthropology mein, Paul Farmer. So he was a medical anthropologist, he was a doctor also. He happened to study, or say he happened to do a kind of applied anthropological say study in Haiti. So Haiti is the place where there was high prevalence of TB and AIDS. So he was there with his team in order to cure the people, or in order to provide some kind of medical support to the people suffering from TB and AIDS. बहुत ज़्यादा high prevalence था. And while doing so, he was also doing his anthropological study. Okay. So यहाँ पे he developed the concept of what is called as structural violence. So he used his knowledge of medicine. At the same time, he also was a medical anthropologist. So he developed the concept of structural violence. So he says that structure क्या है यहाँ पे, दो वर्ड है, structure और violence. So his structural violence talks about how social and economic arrangements harm the poor. How social and economic arrangements of the society, they are harming the poor. That is what is called as a structural violence. Now, why violence? Because this kind of social and economic arrangements, they are causing injuries to the people, they are harming the people, and that's why this structure is creating some kind of a violence. Although it's not visible, but definitely it's a violence because it is causing injury to the people who are suffering from because of this structure. Okay, what is this structural violence that he talks? He says that AIDS or TB, it's not uh, because of, say, their genetics. AIDS and TB is not only because of their cultural practices. AIDS and TB is because of the structure. Now, what is the structure? कि भाई poverty है, imperialism is there, colonization is there, global forces are acting against them. This is a place where they are getting extracting the resources, they are making this land barren, they're dumping the waste there, they are at the passive end, or say passive end of receiving the forces of globalization. Okay, तो उनको सिर्फ exploit किया जा रहा है by the global forces, by the global geopolitical forces. Moreover, the colonization or imperial interest, they have instituted a puppet government over there that is serving the interest of the masters and not the people. Their resources are getting exploited by the global forces, and they are at the receiving end of it. Okay, and that's why they are suffering from these kind of diseases. This disease is not because of their poverty, their activities, their genetics, but because of the global forces. अब इसको भी आप quote कर सकते हो कि that how economic and political aspects are integrated with, so say something like this. That question was there in last year means. So that is, I'll just read that question and then I'll explain again. So ये Paul Farmer, he introduced this concept of structural violence कि ये structural arrangements हैं जिसकी वजह से they are at the receiving end, they are suffering not because of their genetics. Not just that, uh, he introduced a concept called as, or critique of, immodest claims of causality. Now, what is this immodest claims of causality? It's a critique, or it's a rejection of the idea of cultural relativism. Okay, how this particular medical anthropologist rejects this cultural relativism? Because cultural relativist would try to justify, or say would try to explain the presence of diseases in this society because of their cultural behaviors. They would show that these are the cultural behaviors that they have, and because of this cultural behaviors they are suffering from so and so particular diseases. But in doing so, they consider this society to be isolated from the global forces. And since this society is considered to be isolated from the global forces, the role of the global forces has been completely neglected. Okay, and that is what he's trying to say, that in terms of cultural relativism, which tries to find certain cultural behaviors responsible for their present condition, क्योंकि cultural relativism यही बोलता है कि anything that has to be understood in the cultural context. Okay, so in that case they would say that कि ये ऐसा करते हैं, इस वजह से इनको ये problem है. So everything will be blamed, the blame will shift upon the victims कि तुम लोग ऐसा करते हो इसीलिए तुम बीमार हो, तुम लोग ऐसा, you don't follow basically safe sex and that's why you are suffering from AIDS. You don't basically follow hygiene and that's why you're suffering from TB. You don't follow you don't eat cooked food, or say you eat from here and there and that's why you are suffering from TB, and so on and so forth. So it's the cultural context mein the behavior has to be understood. Okay, but in doing so they are ignoring the larger broader structural forces. That is, why am I eating that food? Do I have an alternative? Why are we practicing unsafe sex? Do we have an alternative? And if I don't have the alternative, who is responsible for it? Am I the one who is responsible for it, or do I chose it because of my will, or was I forced to choose it? Okay, so that is the external forces. So जब कोई option ही नहीं बचा for any other alternative, then what I am supposed to do? It's the only way that was left to me. I just to survive by eating anything, or just to survive by having unhygienic toilets and all, or die out. So I chose that way. So our cultural relativism is not showing the complete picture. It is ignoring the global forces that actually shaped that behavior. Okay, and that is the critique of immodest claims of causality. Okay, so that is the idea of Paul Farmer. We'll see this in more detail in, say, epidemiology also, applied anthropology also, but you can quote this example. So this is about the nature of the, or say unit 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and it's a brief summary of history of anthropology. Okay, कि कैसे anthropology as a discipline evolve करता है, and इसमें बहुत सारे जो aspects आते गए, and धीरे-धीरे we'll cover about the more detailed aspects of it. So आज के लिए इतना ही रखते हैं. We'll continue from this point in the next class. Okay, don't worry, the schedule will be completed on time. Okay. अच्छा, just one more thing. It's a important day for me today because I've been working for long on a PYQ model answer book, and today that book is available. So it's available for you can have your copy, but it's not free for sure. Okay, so but you can have a look over it, and if you're writing PYQs, that book can act as a reference for you. So you can compare that answers, and if you want to add something from it, you can definitely go for it. Thank you so much.